Welcome to another interesting edition of the Economy and Politics Show, where we discuss developments around the economy and how it affects the populace. Today, we'll be looking at the recently published June 2021 inflation rate for Nigeria and the implications on the household. With me to have this conversation is Dr. Muda Yusuf. He's an economist and now the former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I've known Dr. Muda since 2011 as the LCCI. I remember the first time we met at a forum, and I can say that he's been one of those big drivers in the investment industry and economic space. Nice to have you on the program, Dr. Muda Yusuf.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And before we begin our conversation, let's take a view of what happened last week in the Nigerian economic space and across the region. First, Nigeria is poised to boost its non-oil exports following the launch of the Economic Community of West African States Trade Promotion Organizations. The Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Export Promotion Council, Mr. Segun Awolowo, as the inaugural president of the ECOWAS TPO, said the NEPC is repositioning the nation's exports through the implementation of its 50 billion naira export expansion facility program. Also last week, the Department of Petroleum Resources disclosed that a total of 48 disputes in the oil and gas industry were resolved in the first 3 months after the inauguration of the Alternative Dispute Resolution Center, which commenced in January. And also last week, South Africa released its June inflation rate, which is currently 4.9%, showing that it decelerated from a 30-year high of 5.2% in May 2021. Those are some of the key updates that occurred in the economy for last week. Don't forget that last week was also the Eid al-Kabha Muslim holiday. This was Tuesday and Wednesday last week. We'll take a brief break, and when we return, we have this very interesting conversation on the June 2021 inflation and implications on the household.
The ProShare mobile app, your non-stop access to financial and economic information. With the ProShare app, you can customize your preferred news and videos. You can also get access to latest financial and economic news. Watch videos related to business, economy, financial markets, and lots more. The ProShare app gives you in-depth market stats from the NSE, FMDQ, and NASD. That's not all. You also get real-time alerts. The ProShare mobile app. Information at your pace and in your space.
Welcome back. So, Dr. Muda Yusuf, the inflation rate, yes, is now 17.75%, a slight decrease month on month, but of course, year-on-year increase. And while the food inflation is 21.83% at the moment, still high inflation rates in the country. First, what's your perspective on this as it affects the household? Because, when we look at inflation, we're looking at three types. Either as a demand pull, a cost push, or a built-in inflation.
Thank you very much. The situation with inflation in Nigeria is still very, very disturbing. It's still very worrisome. Even though we saw a very marginal deceleration in the inflation rate by 0.18%. I'm talking of headline inflation now.
Yes.
In May, it was 17.93%. In June, it was 17.75%. So if you look at the materiality of this change, we could as well say that there's not been any change. And the reality is that inflation at over 17% is still extremely high by any standard. It's even worse when we have food inflation still at 21.83%. And if there is any serious impact on poverty and on welfare, I think the key impact will be in the area of food and some other essential items that have been seriously impacted by inflation. And that has very serious implications for poverty. And for a country that has been struggling with the issue of poverty, issue of unemployment, with purchasing power, I think this is a very, very disturbing situation. The core inflation also dropped only marginally by 0.06%. The core inflation is driven largely by the import content of the inflation basket. And you know where all of this is coming from, especially around FX. So generally, the situation is not anything to cheer. It remains very disturbing. It's a major macroeconomic issue that we need to deal with, affecting a whole number of segments in the economy. So it's a very worrisome situation.
Very worrisome, you've said, Dr. Muda Yusuf, particularly with the fact that Nigeria is grappling with poverty, grappling with unemployment, and weak purchasing power. So this is something that is a major macroeconomic concern that needs to be addressed. But what are the implications for the household? You've already said three things, particularly now with the population that's facing a low per capita income. What are the implications for the household?
Well, the implications for the household is quite profound. And also equally profound is the implications for businesses, because some of these factors are also interrelated, because it is the businesses that create the jobs for the households, that pay the salaries of those in the household. So they are interrelated. First is the impact on production and operating costs.
Yes.
If you talk to any producer or any investor generally in the economy today, all of them do lament seriously about the cost of operations, the cost of production, which implies that ultimately the prices of their goods will go up. And you know what it is when, as a producer, your prices are going up. It has implications for sales. It has implications for turnover. Secondly, as prices go up, and as turnover also reduces and sales reduces because of the increase in costs and prices, profit margins are eroded. So there is what many businesses are going through now is the situation of erosion of profit margins. Because it is not in all cases that the producers or investors can transfer the additional costs to their consumers. That is what we call demand elasticity in economics. For products whose demand are very elastic, invariably it is the producer or the entrepreneur that will take the hit, because it is very difficult to transfer those additional costs in form of higher prices to their consumers. Then it also poses a major risk to the retention of existing jobs and the creation of new jobs. Because of the macroeconomic effect of inflation, which is negative, it poses a risk to the capacity of businesses to create new jobs and to even retain existing ones, which of course also has implications for the household that we talk about. Then inflation is a major poverty accelerator. If there is anything that deepens poverty very fast, it is inflation, because it reduces the purchasing power of the citizens. It reduces what we call the real income. And when we are faced with a situation, as you know, we are almost in a stagflation. The economy is stagnating. That means even nominal incomes are not increasing. Nominal incomes are dropping in some cases. People are even losing their jobs in many cases. So when you have that kind of scenario and prices are going up, that means that the poverty crisis is worsening. So if there is the biggest enemy of the poor is inflation, because it erodes whatever income that they have. Inflation also has very serious implications for mortality of businesses. The rate at which businesses will survive or not survive, especially at the SME level, is also a function of inflation. Because as prices are galloping, not many businesses will be able to survive across all sectors. Whether you are talking of production, whether you are talking of those in services, whether you are talking of those in trading, it has very profound implications for mortality of businesses. So those are the key implications of the intense inflationary pressures across households, across businesses, entrepreneurs, and the general health of the economy.
Oh. There's one major concerning takeaway here that inflation is a big accelerator of poverty. So definitely, the analysts have been speaking on some of the issues that needs to be done to address it. But what are the drivers? Recently, watching an interview that the minister featured, he talked about the fact that the issues around transportation and issues around foreign exchange are part of those factors that are really driving inflation. I know you've been speaking a lot about how we can approach the issue of foreign exchange. Even our ProShare research has brought some ideas into what needs to be done, particularly diversifying our foreign exchange flows. What would you describe as the drivers of this inflation? You know, I first asked about the fact that are we in a demand pull situation, a cost push, or a built-in inflation scenario?
There are three principal drivers of inflation. And we can categorize this into, first, the cost push factors. We have the supply chain disruptions, and we have the monetization of fiscal deficit, which in some literature is also referred to as inflation tax. Now, if you want to disaggregate the key elements of each of the category of drivers, if you look at the cost push factors, for instance, we'll be looking at the high energy cost. You know what the energy cost is now? Either you are talking about the regular electricity supply, the electricity tariff increase. You're talking about alternative sources of energy, the cost of diesel, which has gone up by close to maybe 10% or even more. Diesel cost, as we speak, is around 280 naira per liter or even more. The cost of aviation fuel, and even the cost of gas. Don't forget, even for those who use gas, the cost is even priced in dollars. So you know the implication of that when you look at the exchange rate. And for industries that are producing and selling in naira and having to pay for gas in dollars, you know what that means for the sustainability of such businesses. Then we also have the challenge of the high transportation cost. Most of the trucks and vehicles that move goods around the country are all running on diesel. And to the extent that the cost of diesel has been going up, this will also reflect in the cost of these goods. And I must say that one of the biggest factors also in food inflation is the cost of transportation. So apart from the cost of fuel, the quality of roads and the very weak connectivity that we have in terms of the quality of connectivity within the economy is contributing highly to the high cost of transportation. Then there is the high cost of logistics generally. Transportation is a component of logistics, but logistics is much bigger. If you're looking at things, for instance, that around the ports and other factors that relate to the delivery of goods from one part of the country to the other. These things are very, very expensive. They are very costly because of all the inefficiencies around the logistics economy. Then we have high import tariff. Some producers have complained about the high cost of their inputs as a result of the high import duty that they pay on them, either on raw materials or intermediate products. That is also fueling inflation from the cost perspective. Then we have the challenge of exchange rate depreciation. As we speak now, operating exchange rate is over 500 naira to the dollar. And to the extent that a lot of raw materials are imported, and to the extent that a lot of finished products are also imported. So this has also very profound implication for inflation from a cost push perspective. Then we have the second category of drivers, which is the output disruptions or supply chain disruptions. And the first among these is the security or insecurity problem that we are having across the country. Supply of products, particularly agricultural products, have been severely disrupted. Many farmers can no longer go to farms. Many of them are in IDP camps. Some of these products cannot be moved easily around the country because of security problems. So the supply chain or the output generally in the agricultural sector has been severely impacted by the security situation in the country, which unfortunately has been already. Then the crisis at the ports not abated is also a major factor disrupting the supply chains. Then the exclusion of some critical industries from the official foreign exchange window is also a major factor because we have seen quite a number of industries that have been excluded from the FX market. Not because there's a fiscal policy that excludes them, but the decision of the Central Bank of Nigeria to exclude them in the process of the demand management of Forex. That also has impacted on the supply side of the economy. Then, of course, we have the liquidity crisis in the foreign exchange market itself. Even for those that have not been excluded from the foreign exchange market, they can still not have the required level of foreign exchange that they need to be able to run their factories. Then we have trade policy issues, which is also disrupting outputs and disrupting supply chains. Trade policy has to do with things like the border closure, although it has been partially lifted, but we still have elements of it. We can be talking about partial border closure, import restrictions, import licensing, all these bottlenecks to trade, international trade, is also a contributory factor. Then there is also the issue of weak productivity in the economy. If productivity is weak, output will be affected. So to the extent that we have very weak productivity as a result of poor or inadequate application of technology to increase output and all of those things have also been affecting output. Then the third category of drivers is the monetization of fiscal deficit, which in the literature is also referred to as inflation tax. The fiscal deficit financing by the Central Bank of Nigeria is a major driver of inflation because this financing is typically very inflationary. It increases money supply and aggravates inflation. In economic balance, we refer to this kind of financing, which they call ways and means, as high-powered money because of the impact of money supply. So it's not a factor that we often talk about, but I think it's a factor that we should begin to reckon with because the amount of financing of deficit by the CBN has been increasing exponentially. In the last report that was released by the finance minister, interest payments on ways and means, which is CBN's borrowing or lending to the government, interest payment alone was 480 billion naira. So these are the principal drivers of inflation.
Okay, so Dr. Yusuf, in just like in 3 minutes, can you just tell us the way forward from the policy angle? As you know, the Multi-Policy Committee meeting, the 280th Multi-Policy Committee meeting of the Central Bank of Nigeria begins today. So what would you expect to see from monetary policy and fiscal policy in terms of approach, considering this very challenging issue of inflation, which you rightly said is an aggravator of poverty? And this government is really, really bold in saying that it wants to lift 100 million people out of poverty. So how do you deal with this monster of inflation, high-rising inflation that is an aggravator of poverty?
Well, from the monetary point of view, we have always recognized the fact that situations like this put the central bank in a very, very difficult position. Because on one hand, and the CBN is poised to ensure that the economy is stimulated, especially with the level of unemployment that we have. On the other hand, it has a key mandate of ensuring that there is price stability. So at least at every MPC meeting, this dilemma always manifests. But I think at this time, I think the CBN should also be looking at the issues of inflation. Because if you are talking about the welfare of the people, the prices of goods and services are also very critical. But the reality is there is so much that the monetary policy instruments can do in bringing down inflation. Because as you can see from the conversation that we have had, the biggest issues are around issues of cost and around issues of supply chain disruptions. So they are more or less supply side issues. So the fiscal authorities have a much bigger role to play in moderating the inflationary pressure, dealing with all the supply side factors that you have mentioned, around the costs and around the issues of output disruptions. Of course, the CBN should also be a lot firmer around the monetization of fiscal deficit, especially what you call the ways and means. As much as possible, this means of financing should be kept within the limits that is statutory, which is provided for in the CBN Act. That's a prudential regulation within the Act on how much and to what extent the CBN can be financing deficits through its ways and means. But I expect that the CBN should also begin to worry about issues of inflation and begin to worry about coordination and complementarity of fiscal and monetary policies going forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muda Yusuf, an economist and former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It's been a pleasure having you, and we want to say a big appreciation featuring you today, and also commendation for your years of service in the LCCI. Quite almost a decade, if I'm right, and I think it's been an interesting time engaging in improving the LCC, and we hope to have you subsequently now, at least more, discussing economic policy issues. I know that you're featured on across board, but having you more on our show. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Otto. Thank you very much for having me.
And that'll be all for this edition of the Economy and Politics Show. Yes, inflation is a big discussion point in the country as it has to do with the economy, issues around poverty, unemployment, and even weak purchasing power. If you want to ask a question, make a comment, or also make your suggestions around this conversation, send your views, questions, or comments to otuabasi.abasekong@proshareng.com, which is displaying on your screen. Also, you can follow our social media platforms that's also displayed on the screen to get latest updates on the economy and developments across the financial markets. Also, you can click on www.proshareng.com and go onto the hand of the bar, scroll down and click on Nigeria Economy to get all the updates. Like I rightly said, the 280th Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the Central Bank of Nigeria begins today. So follow all the updates even till tomorrow, which is the decision day, where the Central Bank Governor, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, will be taking decisions from the Monetary Policy Committee as it has to do with coordinating monetary policy. Don't forget at this period you need to stay safe. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.